you're in James Madison University, and you
Yes.
talk about in the book that's where you met Lee, right? Right.
I met Lee at EMU, Eastern Mennonite.
Oh yeah. Okay, EMU. I knew it was.
He was a graduate. It's JMU, EMU. Yeah.
Yeah.
Two M's and two U's. He was a graduate of EMU. Even though he's younger, he was already done school.
Yeah. You write that that you walked into this print shop where Lee was working. Can you tell us a bit about that time you first met Lee?
Well, I was at a point of real desperation because I was supposed to be in Pennsylvania on a Friday with sketches that I had written and developed with an actor who told me on Monday he couldn't go. And so I tried for 3 days to find somebody to go with me. And I was talking to people that I already knew, which is when you're not confident about any number of things, about who you are, your material, all that kind of thing. You sort of stick in your small pond. And I knew who Lee was because I had seen him do a couple of things up front, even though he was a grad. And I knew he was funny, and he had a great reputation on campus. Most people know who he was. And so without that desperation, I'm not sure that I would have asked him. And obviously without the friends saying, I'll introduce you to him, when I told my friend I didn't know who he was, I'm not sure I would have done it. And that would have been a huge, different trajectory for both of our lives. So you meet Lee in this print shop, and you somehow convince him to come with you to join the crazy train, and you head off, and you do the sketch together. What did you realize when you started working together with Lee? Well, first of all, I realized that he was really, really good. And that we started a real strong symbiotic relationship where my development as a writer was just starting, writing comedy sketches. And Lee had done more than I had at that point. But Lee wasn't a diehard, I got to be an actor kind of guy. He was a great artist, a visual artist, and he was working in the graphic arts department at the university. And so I'm a great lover of physical comedy. I love Red Skelton and those kind of things. So I was writing things that were much more physically based, action as opposed to words. And Lee was a great wordsmith. If you know Monty Python at all, there's 3 sets of writing. There was the original 5. Eric Idle wrote by himself. John Cleese wrote with Graham Chapman, and Terry Jones wrote with Michael Palin. And Palin and Jones wrote if you watch the old shows and you see this panoramic view and it's a long setup with action and so forth, that's probably Jones and Palin. It's about words. I wish to make a complaint. My parrot's dead. That's Cleese.
I imagine Cleese is the one that wrote that whole discussion of like, are you suggesting coconuts migrate? And like, I mean, what do you mean they didn't swallow? And like, I just love those kind of British humor takes. Yeah.
Lee was a great wordsmith. So I think what I realized too, that we started to move in he played high status well. He was taller than me. He was almost 6'4", good looking guy. And he played the aristocratic high status well. And I tend to play lower status better. And so that first week, that first sketch, I had written actually it opposite, because the actor who was going to go with me played low status well. He was slightly overweight and swarthy and funny and scraggly hair and wild all over the place. And so what we did is we flipped it. And then Lee played the higher status and I played lower status. And it became this model for us to just slide into like an old glove. And I also realized that one of the things I like doing, and I think I'm still pretty good at it, is I'll give you space on the stage. And I think usually there's in relationships, there's often dynamics, there's conflict too. And I think we learned with each other about how to give each other space. And Lee was used to doing big bombastic things, and with lots of words and big actions, and that I was doing the smaller things. And I would just give him space to do it. And then my reaction to his action and my reaction then made a nice hook. As I said in the book and in the show, I think that we found our comedic soulmates.
Yeah, you did say that in the book.
We loved almost the same things around what was funny and comedy, but we approached them differently when it came to writing, which was a really wonderful way to form a relationship. So and we knew we had something. We just knew we had something. I had never experienced that before. To have somebody that good be so responsive to things I had written. That was the great thing about Lee. I wrote more than Lee did. I've never met anyone since who understood what I was writing and why and where the humor lay and how to mine it more deeply than Lee. He was just brilliant at that. So,
well, in the book you talk about, and you write this exact line. You say, within 2 years of meeting Lee, we began to witness his struggles with depression. It was our first encounter with a clinically diagnosed illness up close. So I guess some of those questions I wanted to ask you when you bring this up in the book is, how did you personally process that? You have someone that you consider your comedic soulmate, and yet it's almost like watching almost like a spouse suffer through this. Right. Because it's someone that you've connected with on a soul level. How did you process his depression? And I guess once you reflect on that, maybe tell our audience a bit of advice that how would you encourage others to process and help friends and family that also struggle with depression?
Yeah, it scared the shit out of me. And it was the not knowing the why. And I think we still stigmatize mental illnesses.
Yes.
To the point where we know intellectually that this is tantamount to high blood pressure or leukemia or something serious of the nature of that. But there's this little part of your brain that's going, just stop it. Act better.
Yeah.
Just don't be depressed. Don't like it like it's possible.
Yeah. Just get happy, right?
Yeah, get happy.
Yeah.
That's a piece of it too. Then, if I'm really honest, there were times when I was just ready to give up and say, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do the theater thing. And some of his pushback to me was about my direction. That became our direction. And he became frustrated with that because, when is he going to have a say about what we do, how we do it, what gets written, how it gets written? And I was so enamored of this possibility that I might have, in many cases, steamrolled that. Now, I guess in my defense, he also struggled with what is his direction? What is his role? What are those things? Get really disturbed at what he considered to be his passionlessness, and then was just riding mine. And when you're riding someone else's passion, it can feel empty, or you can begin to resent. And I just remember, I think I put that in the book too. I remember coming home and saying to my wife, I'm done. This was very early. I said, I want to work with an adult. And this was in 97, 98. So, and we met in 87. So, I mean, we were trying to make it. We were still we were probably full time by that point. And I just said, I'm done. And so I think advice, there's so much more information available about what diagnoses are, and they're not the same for everybody. That's part of the problem with medication and finding the right medication is that we're doing our best case guesses in terms of what's going to work best because everybody's chemistry is different and it changes. And what are the trigger points and how do you avoid those and how do you not avoid those? So getting as much information about the nature of how that works for different people. And if it's your friend, how does it work for them? Or your spouse, how does it work for them? Bipolar diagnosis is really scary for many people.
Yeah.
Because there are too many instances of suicide coming out of that diagnosis. It doesn't have to be that way. I have a good friend who said it is a what did she say? She said it's a life sentence. No. I should really quote her well. It's a life sentence, but it's not a box. It doesn't control me. It's something I will always have. And so what we're trying to do with the tour and the show that's based on all of these is to say, we need to talk about this more, because when you tell your story, or when you see a play that allows you to connect to a part of your story within their story, you feel validated and valued. And when you feel validated and valued, it helps you find your footing. When we hear ourselves, that's why therapists are some of the most amazing people in the world, because their job is to hear people's pain, hear people's struggle, know that they're being, letting those people know that they're being heard. And that skill of listening is enormous. So those things of, but I'm not unique in this. There were times when the last thing I wanted to do is listen to Lee. I mean, later on, especially. But early on, I didn't know how to do this. I was just glad that there were other professionals that were much more capable than I. But then how do you do the day-to-day stuff? How do you do the things that and I remember thinking very clearly that the up and down of, am I tying my career and my passions in life to someone who may not share them and is not healthy? But he was almost never not good on stage. I can think of maybe twice. And of course, there's times I was not good on stage either.
I mean, everyone has an off day, right?
In terms of where his illness affected his performance, almost never.
This may not be like maybe an appropriate connection, but I wonder what you think about that many performers, very famous performers, I think of men like Robin Williams, entertainers that know how to make people laugh. They also tend to have these very dark places in their souls. Is there any parallel there, or am I drawing something that's just not shouldn't be?
I think there's a parallel there, but on the other hand, professions like dentists and doctors have a lot more instances of suicide than comedians do. It's just that people like Robin Williams and Lenny Bruce and some other really dark-minded people, they had that edge. Andy Kaufman had a very strange edge to them. I think they just get elevated because the paradox is greater. Because
the laughter, and then it almost seems that if someone can make us laugh, we think this person is. They have the bottle of it somewhere, and that they're just unleashing.
And when Robin Williams died, I had a lot of people reaching out and saying, thinking about you and all those kinds of things. Fine, that was great. But then I had this very strange, and I'm not proud of this reaction. And I said to someone, not every creative genius is mentally ill, and not every mental person is a creative genius.
That's true. Right.
I like to romanticize that. And but there's some stuff that's just come out about Robin Williams and a number of the illnesses that he had to contribute to all of that. But so Lee's paradox with that is, and in part, not many people knew about it, because just of the very nature of who he was, being able to hide it, very high functioning. Once he had his initial hospitalization, and then through medication, he rarely had those times where he was just unable to get out of bed. Then he found a way to find equilibrium, found a wonderful woman, got married. The whole, raising children and all of those kinds of things. And then we were getting better at business, and that whole thing got a little more stable. So there was a stabilizing nature.
Tell us a bit about the the theater company, the productions that you and Lee ended up doing.
Yeah. Well, we wrote our first show called Ted and Lee Live the Armadillo Tour. And it was comedy sketches. We just thought armadillos were funny.
Yes,
And it was they are. It was a collection of things that we had written over the previous 2 years while I was still in school. And then we hired a dramaturge and director who brought us together, and we just improv'd and worked on some new materials and just made each other laugh like crazy and put this show up. And we tried to be drawn from people that we admired, that were smart, and did what I call, that Python did so well, was intelligent silly.
Mm-hmm.
It was silly, but you could see that there was an edge of why. And that was part of what we wanted to do. So that was the first show that we had written. And then we got some traction out of that. And then we had someone come to us and say, I had started writing some material about the disciples. Peter and Andrew they became, but initially they were just two of Jesus' disciples. And in that consternation, in that wonder and confusion about who this man was and why he was telling us to do certain things and not getting it. It seems like the gospel stories are just a history of not getting it, which is why I think it's still a great metaphor for where we are. And then, so they came to us and said, we're thinking about writing a curriculum or filming a curriculum based on this. Can you write more material? And we got a writing grant to write both the video material and the stage show at the same time. And so then we had two shows. We had a comedy show, and then we had a show about the Peter and Andrew, the disciples of Jesus. And then we wrote an Old Testament show because it seemed like that was next. And we had some great fun with that. And finding great meaning in it. I did a lot of research on a number of books that I found really helpful. The biography of God was one of them. And it was just looking at God as a literary figure in this book and not trying to find where the influence of faith. And saw what some might say is hints at process theology, where God is changing and evolving in his or her relationship with us as we are evolving and changing as well. And so that show reflected that, and I think it had some really great depths to it. Then we had 3 shows, and we got a couple of great breaks at big conferences that we were at, non-denominational but still Christian youth worker conferences, and that just kind of pushed us out. That was in 98, 99, 2000. And that just pushed us all over the country more than anything else. A lot of it was the Peter and Andrew stories. Wrote then a Christmas show. Every company needs a Christmas show.
Every company needs a Christmas show.
And we brought a woman in, a good friend, a great writer, a wonderful actor, beautiful woman. She toured with us for 10 years. The 3 of us did that show together. So every December we'd get together. That was. Then we wrote another 2 more shows after that. The last show that we wrote together was with composer and musician Ken Miedema out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, who's a blind musician and composer. And that was the story of Jacob and Esau. So again, going back to, because there were themes of forgiveness woven in through all of that, and it had some powerful impact beyond just, what does this mean for us as a people of faith? So it was a matter of being seen, being good enough to have someone say, hey, I think we need to have these people come in. Word of mouth, kind of the only way it works. We hired an agent who really only represented us, so we didn't hire a big agency. Again, trying to stay in a bit of control about where and how we went and how often. Both of us had families, and we tried never to go out more than 10 days at a time. Tried to keep one sacred weekend a month, those kind of things too. So.
What kind of feedback did you receive from your audiences? I remember laughing at some of it in the book, but I'll let you share with our viewing our audience.
We were surprised. I thought I was doing some really interesting, edgy stuff that was going to be theatrical and different, and it was for a lot of people, but for a lot more, than I thought at the time. There were people that embraced it from all levels of conservatism to progressive faith positions, Christian positions. And I was confused by that at first because we were kind of playing with the story. But there were two things that happened. One is a director saw us at a college and said, I can tell you why you're not getting the reaction you thought you would. It's because the audience is always smarter than you are. We're the last people to get it on stage. So we wrote these characters in that they were discovering along the way, and the audience was always one step ahead of them, which makes the audience feel good about themselves. And if you make them laugh and make the audience feel good about themselves and make them feel superior to the characters, that's a one way to diffuse some of the concerns that people would have about what we were doing with the Bible stories. But we had some real pushback too, which was hard to take initially, but now I find it delightful because I think we're doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing. Because we would say, okay, what's your problem with this story? We're doing the feeding of the 5,000. And we meander about in the story and we create scenarios, because that's what you do in theory. You create stories that are between the lines. And then we ask the question, well, did Jesus still tell them to go find food? Yeah. Did they find something? Yeah. Was it enough? No. Did Jesus still then miraculously feed these 5,000 plus the men, women, and children? Yeah. So it's a matter, there's this through line for the story. It's just that we wove our way around it. And those edges were where the humor was. The through line of the story isn't necessarily where the humor is. I mean, there's a Jewish tradition called Midrash, which is finding where the story is in between the story. And that's all we were doing. So that the people who the people who were so upset at our Song of Solomon sketch, which was one of our favorites, we called it Solomon de Bergerac.
Okay.
So this young man goes to Solomon and says, I'm trying to woo this woman underneath her balcony and I got nothing. You got to come help me. So he basically goes and hides underneath the balcony with Solomon, and Solomon feeds him the line that becomes the Song of Songs. So your hair is like a flock of goats, your teeth are like a flock of shorn ewes, and then the young man says, is everything going to be livestock? And so this one person was really, really upset with the whole show and how we portrayed angels and God and saying, and then we got the Song of Solomon, and he was scared to death we were going to do breasts, with the nose, the eyes, and then we went right to navel. And then he said that, then I've heard some speakers say that this is a metaphor for Jesus's relationship with the church. And that is just so wrong. And when people make those kind of assessments, I just, I'm sorry. There's not much more you can say. And that's why the very last line in the piece is, Solomon says, I do believe this is the most beautiful love poem song I've ever written. I hope no one takes it out of context.
Well, it's interesting the way the churches use Song of Solomon, especially, right? Like it's often like, I mean, the Hebrew tradition of it, like you didn't read it till you're like 30, I think, and it's just kind of hilarious to think about. Well, I wouldn't be able to read it till I turn 30 in a couple months, which is
that's great. Oh, it'll be fun for you. Congratulations.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna read it on my 30th birthday.
Well, one of the great things I heard in the last couple of years is someone saying that part of the reason it might be there is so that we learn what lust is, so that we learn what love could be. And that's, if the Creator's trying to still teach us about love, well, lust ain't a bad place to start.
Well, I think we all start there, don't we? Like, I had a friend that told me that like every relationship that you'll ever have, like a romantic relationship, will always start off in the infatuation stage.
Yeah.
It tears at you, right? Like
I usually say when I first fell in lust and love, when I was 16, and I happened to marry her, but that was the first time I fell in lust and love. So not the first time I lusted, first time I fell in love.
Important feedback. Well, the book takes a very personal turn when you open up and you share the story of the loss of Lee. Right. And I wonder if you could kind of share with our viewing audience just kind of a snippet of what it was like in those moments when you first heard the news? And yeah.
Like many people, it feels surreal. I don't know my medical stuff well enough, but I think it's partly shock.
Yeah.
That you see yourself, it's like seeing yourself do something. You feel like it's an out of a body experience almost of walking. We got a phone call and I was making dinner and I turned the grill off and we went over and we weren't told why. All we were told was, you need to come over. It's Lee. And so Sue and I, and it was only 2 miles away. We just lived just on the other side of campus. And I remember we didn't say anything to each other. You know, we didn't speculate. We just didn't say anything. And we walked in the front door and there was nobody there. And it was eerie and the whole house was open. Windows, doors, nobody in the house. So we walked downstairs and then walked out the back door of the basement, and that's what the garage was attached there. And then the paramedics were down there, and Lee's wife was there, and police were there. And it just felt surreal. And the person who had called us met us there in that lawn and said, we lost him. And it's a little bit, I sometimes tell people that, because they say, were you shocked? I sometimes say, I was shocked, not surprised. I was surprised, not shocked. Because when someone has a 20-year history of bipolar and deep illness and hospitalizations, he didn't talk about suicide with me, but apparently he did with other people. So those moments of, I remember started seeing, I made a big mistake. I called our agent and she was traveling and her husband was going to wait till she got home because he didn't want her traveling with that.
Yeah.
And I think I called my parents, called my brother, I think. And then I went to call our oldest son and I couldn't do it. I couldn't stop crying. And Sue had to call Elliot. And my brother's a year and a half older than me and was my best friend. And then Lee was my best friend. And Elliot, your firstborn, I don't know what it is, but I would confuse my brother's name, Tim, and Elliot and Lee. And I would alternate anytime, all three of those for each other. I never did it with the other boys. So I would call Lee Elliot and Elliot Lee constantly. And then I would throw Tim in. So, like your parents do all that, trying to name your kids.
Yeah, my mom does that all the time.
So I think there's something there that made it impossible for me to talk to Elliot. And I remember that being a piece of the evening, and then not sleeping all night. And in a close church community that we have, you're soon surrounded by people.
Yeah.
And sometimes people don't say the right thing, meaning they don't say anything. But they don't say the wrong thing, which means they just don't say anything.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to say. Yeah, and I told my youngest son, who did part of the tour with me, and I hadn't said this out loud very much either. I talked to him about it. He said, I think you should put that in the show. And that is that there was so much pressure. There's pressure in any kind of business. We had a show that we were premiering in July, and this was May, and it wasn't finished. The show wasn't finished yet. And then we were going to do this video series in the fall, and it was an enormous project. And I really pushed Lee that I said we should do this. So he was on board, but I knew he wasn't really on board.
Mm.
We were in the middle of a new campaign for the show that we were touring at the time. So there was this mounting pressure, and there's always mounting pressure. You know, I've got 2 commissioned shows I have to finish by next year, and still trying to do a business. So there's always, and most of it's good, most of it's energizing. And I say all that because I've come to a point more honestly of saying there was also relief.
Mm.
Nobody expected anything out of me because they knew I couldn't do anything.
Mm.
And so for 3 days, I was sort of carried by people. And it wasn't, again, our oldest son spent Saturday at the house, and his job was to just follow me around and make sure I didn't do more than I was supposed to do as we were trying to prepare for the funeral and the hundreds of people that were coming in. And our whole family was here, my siblings and my wife's siblings and parents. My parents were in, and I was just carried along.
Yeah.
And that's what happens too. When a congregation, a family, of people care for you. And I just remember feeling buoyed. And what happens then for anyone who experiences grief is everybody gives you a window.
Yeah.
Then after that, whether they ever say it or not, there's an expectation that because their lives need to get back to normal, how you represent, what you represent into their lives, they expect in some ways to go back to normal.
Yeah.
So their lives need to get back. So how you make that normal is you need to get back to normal, and you ain't ready.
Yeah.
This interesting paradox of care and abandonment.
I know for many people that I've sat with and talked to about grief, they often share with me that the process didn't begin till maybe weeks after the funeral.
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah. And then when it comes, they kind of feel detached from community. It's like they're surrounded in a moment. There's this almost caring, but then they like you shared, like there's this sense of, okay, it's time to get going again. But for many of the close family members, grief, I mean, it's not something you just get over. It's something that you're probably still processing.
Yeah, you're never going to get over it because I sometimes say that the way that we're put together as human beings, and I think when we're the best of who we are programmed to need to love.
Yeah.
But there's this thing in the back of your head that once you realize mortality, that you're going to get hurt. So we live with this sense that the more deeply I love, the more deeply I'm going to hurt.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the line, either consciously or unconsciously, we decide that's worth it.
Yeah. So how did you manage the hurt, the pain after? Like, at what point did you look around you and think, what do I do now?
What I did was that big project we were supposed to do.
Yeah.
I went ahead and did it anyway. So 2 to 3 weeks after Lee died, 2 weeks after Lee died, I started recasting. And in many ways, a big mistake. So I used anger, I used guilt, I used desperation to write and recast and act. I hired some people that actually replicated Lee's roles. We did a whole Christmas tour that year. I wrote, I think, 12 new episodes for that series and recast the ones that Lee and I were going to do together that we had written previously, and just had a whirlwind of activity that I felt like I was at 60% on. And they were points that it would just crash, and then I would put it in a box that men are much more able to do. it seems, than women.
Mm.
You put it in a box, you shove it into the side, cover it with a tarp, and move on.
Yeah, I know there's a man in my congregation. He his brother passed, and 3 days after the funeral, he was on the line again working, right? And I just couldn't believe it. I was like, "You're not going to take more time?" And no, I need to get back to work. There are things to do, and it seems all I did was just say, "Okay, I guess that's what you have to do." But I knew that the grieving hadn't even started. To be honest, yeah.
Yeah, I spent, so that when you do that and you don't do the process that's going to help you in the future, what you're doing is it's just going to take longer.
Yeah.
And it's going to manifest itself differently. And in the book, I call 2008 is the year I lost my ass and most of my mind.
Yeah.
And it was mostly a depressed year.
So maybe share a bit more about like how your grief came out through your work, how you were processing, but also like tell us how you lost your ass basically in your mind.
Well, I was in Tennessee at a big church, and I had hired the guy who came in and did the Peter and Andrew stories with me for the video shoot, did some shows with me in the spring, and they were really hard to do. Just in so many ways.
Did it ever feel like betrayal? Like you almost felt like filling the spot of Lee? Did you ever feel like, or did you get the sense of like the show has to go on? Or
I was too pissed at him to feel like I was betraying him.
Okay. Yeah.
He's the one who left.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's when I was dealing with that, and then so it's complicated. I had some conflicts with some of how Jason was doing the work. He's a great actor, but it just wasn't what I wanted. And then I felt like I couldn't say. And then, so we were in this big church and I just realized, I'm getting ready to go on. And I said, I can't do this. I can't do it anymore.
Wow.
And Jason was very understanding, and he just, he just said, you should just take the summer and just get yourself well.
Yeah.
And I had read something about raw foods diets, cleansing the mind, cleansing the body, and all of that. And I jumped into that full bore. And in 3 months, I think I lost 35 pounds. And my arthritic knee felt better. There's parts of me that felt better. But I realized I was stepping into, and I was actually using lines that I was told later are lines that anorexic people sometimes use, which is, this part of my life I can control. I can control the food I put in my body. I can't control whatever else is going on. This I can control. And that's not unique.
Yeah.
And so I've always had a substantial posterior regarding to the rest of my frame that I inherited from my grandmother, God bless her. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have one. I lost it. So, and my brother told a mutual friend of ours one time, he says, well, for the first time, he's no longer fun to be around. That depth of where I was going was something I'd never experienced before. And I remember thinking, if this is what people who deal with the clinical depression deal with every day, I don't know how you live. So it's my hints at that. Some ups and downs, and there were times. So what I did in regard to personally, I began to write more personal. So I wrote a show that incorporated some of the sketches from our shows into it, but I played a homeless man who's lost something that he doesn't want to think about or remember. And his angel shows up with a trunk full of props and a piano and entices him into redoing things that he used to do until he finds that that scene that brings his memory back. And he says, I remember now why I don't do this. There used to be two of us. And I lost him. And so that was a a way to talk about my stuff within the context of a show and get back up on stage and do it. And I wrote a couple of more shows that had much more personal connections to the characters and the pain and the hope at the same time.
Yeah.
So each time I wrote something and stepped on stage and believed it, I moved somewhere. And acting is best when it is always best when it's a piece of you. Acting isn't putting something on, it's taking something off.
Yeah.
You're given lines, and if they're good ones, you will know how to feel. So I gave myself some really good lines and allowed myself to go into those places. And that's why good actors should be empathetic people, and usually are. Stage actors are different than screen actors, because stage actors are always in relationship with other bodies. And I think what happens sometimes in screen is the disconnection between your audience and who you are, and then the fame. Those two things combined can create, well, assholes.
Yeah.
And their assholes are everywhere, but in theater's like folk music. There's very few folk musicians who get too high for their own good.
That's a very good comment.
So that's the way I think about it. You know, if you go to folk festivals and bluegrass festivals, the people are amazing, almost 100%, because they know how hard this is, and they're giving, and they're swapping out stories, and they're doing, you know, we're going to jam over here. You know, rock and roll can do that too, but hey, where's my smoke machine? Where's my sound? Where's my 6,000 people? You know.
Yeah, totally.
So, anyway, that's how I dealt with it, and it. You know, it's been 9 years, and I discovered some things last year before, within the context of somebody responding to the show that's based on the book. And I realized, man, I'm not done yet.
Yeah. Are we ever done?
No, you're not done. It becomes a part of you. Does it define you is part of the question. I think it doesn't have to be a cliche.
Yeah.
It's part of your story. My story will always be for people who knew us together.
Yeah.
The surviving member. It just will always be. And if it's your husband, that's now part of your story that's never gone away. It doesn't mean you can't continue on the journey with hope.
Yeah.
And that's the best way I can describe what try to do. There was a great article by, I don't have it on this computer, John Pavlich. He writes for Progressive Christian website, and he has his own church in North Carolina. And it was about grief, and it was just so insightful about saying these are things that you're never going to, quote, get over it. You shouldn't think about getting over.
Yeah.
You get scars, and scars have a story, and scars can weaken you in places, but it doesn't mean you can't live without your scars. Doesn't mean you can't live with your scars. Just a great way of embracing what grief is. Yeah.
Maybe this might be a bit of a rabbit trail, but what do we think about, like, when we think about Jesus, the resurrected Jesus? He still has scars, eh?
Yeah.
He still has scars in his hands. They tell a story. And I always wondered, like, why leave the scars? I mean, sure, there's that evidence side of that, but I mean, like, big picture, why does Jesus have scars in his hands still?
Well, two things, maybe. Remember, I got a 37 in Greek. Is for us and for him. There's a line that is in a new show that a musician and actor and I wrote together, and it weaves music in and out. It's just some really poignant places. And when we do the Last Supper, I do the line where Jesus said, when he took the bread, and then the song comes in, "This is my body." Then he took the cup as well. "This is my body, this is my blood." And then I say, as Jesus in the line, "And when you do this again, remember me." and it's a plead, remember me. It's not the way we do it, remember me and make it part of your orthodoxy. It was a plead that this is going to be a symbol so you don't forget me.
Yeah.
And it's not about, I'm coming back and the Holy Spirit will come and all of those things. I think in that moment, it's a plea, and scars are a part of that, remembering those moments.
Yeah.
That's what I would say is meaningful for me. And it's funny how I, what comes first, the impulse of writing at the best theatrical line possible, or the impulse of what is the meaning of that part. I find myself writing the line first because it makes theatrical sense and powerful sense in that, and then going back and thinking, as you're doing it, then you're thinking, oh my, and this little shiver goes up the back of my neck. And then you're grateful for art, and creativity, and where I have this sense that there's this creative stream that is never ending, that it comes from the great creator, and we have an option to step in, but it's going whether or not we're stepping in or not. And so when we get to step in, then we get this tingle and this cleanse. And anyway, I'm a romantic about art, so
I often hear artists talk about when they're writing that some of their best work that they've ever written is sort of like it drops on them in a moment, and it almost seems it comes from elsewhere. And yet then they also have these things that they labored, a year just to get there. But
I'm going to get this wrong. Elizabeth Gilbert writes it in her book, Big Magic. She talks about this woman who describes, and there's a tradition, and I'm going to get it wrong, and I'm already apologizing because I'm going to get it wrong, but there are some traditions that don't think of genius as something you have. A genius is a thing that visits you. And a creative idea is like a piece of that genius. It's going to light on top of you, and you have a choice as to whether or not you're going to accept it or not. And if you don't, it's going to move on. Someone else will do that. And this woman talks about hearing a poem come like the wind, and then she races to grab it and pull it by the tail and pull it back in so that she can write it down. And those are romantic notions about it. But sometimes it's a hard gravel road and you're in bare feet.
Yep.
And it's some of both. It's always going to be some of both.
Well, before we close our time today, I was thinking, did you want to share with us any of authors, actors, artists that you kind of claim as inspiration for your own work?
Oh gosh. Well, we talked about my early infatuations with Jewish and physical comedians. Monty Python, John Cleese. John Cleese may not be somebody I'd like to hang out with, but I love his brilliant work. My brother was a huge inspiration for me in working together. Just growing up and surviving, and having humor be an outlet that we will always find. Writers. There's some people that have been tremendously important to me. David Mamet wrote a book called Black and White. He's a writer, author, director. Again, not somebody I maybe want to hang out with. But he really cuts through some of the BS that happens in acting schools and programs and says, if you stand up and tell the truth and use the lines that have been given to you, I will believe you, and that is good acting. None of this other stuff, this sense memory stuff, all that other stuff doesn't matter. I read a book called My Name is Asher Lev by Chaim Potok in seminary, and it became the most important book I read. It's a novel, and it was about a young artist finding out who he was in a strict religious context. And it was stricter than mine, but it was, how do you define yourself as an artist? And in a tradition that does not honor the artist very well. I'm looking at my bookshelf. I love good writing. I find myself defining myself as a writer sometimes more than an actor. I became a writer so I could write, so I could do the acting I wanted to do. but I find myself thinking more as a writer. Maybe the older I get.
Yeah.
There's lots of things to write yet. So.
Do you ever find that your artwork and your writing takes on a sort of prophetic quality?
That's a loaded question.
It is a huge loaded, but maybe I'll give you an example of what I mean by that is where you sort of subversively attack people's assumptions about the status quo.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't have a T-shirt here. I almost wore the T-shirt. It says Subversive Theater.
Yeah.
Since 1987 or something like that, and it's subversive. Then the T-shirt has a dictionary. The definition of subversive, which is to subvert the dominant paradigm. And I think my work, I've always wanted my work to be, if it's in a church context or in a cultural context, to be on one side pushing. And I think that's what art is supposed to do in many cases. Sometimes it's simply to entertain, but what are you learning when you're being entertained and finding meaning? But I like the idea of being in a container and pushing. You can do any direction you want. The left side out a little bit more, or the right out a little bit more. The top. Richard Rohr says that artists need to be, and prophets and poets need to be out at the top, pushing that envelope out farther, so circles bigger. So yes, I think if you can make people laugh and make people think, that's one of the ways that art and theater specifically can help open a mind. It's not going to change a mind, maybe, if it opens a mind to maybe rethink something that you have held. And the older I get, the more I see myself still doing that. I think it was Thomas Merton. Let's call it Thomas Merton, said that if the you 5 years ago doesn't think you're a heretic, you're not growing.
Yeah, I love that line.
I can go back a little farther. 5 scares me a little bit, but 10 feels all right to me. But it's that kind of thing that I'm hoping that the work always pushes a little bit, even if it's a comedy sketch that isn't based on biblical story or something's well crafted and you understand something else that you didn't before, or you see yourself in a story. It can change. It can change your perceptions, and that's, I think, what theater should be doing. Yeah.
Well, where can our viewing audience find you online? Do you have any productions that will be touring? Do you have a Twitter handle, those sort of things?
Yeah, it's Ted and Company. Ted, capital N and CO is Twitter. tedandcompany.com is the website, and Facebook. You can find us there. My age, I'm 60 this year, so I'm barely keeping up on how to do social networking. So sometimes Facebook is the place that we find stuff. I can't get the hang of Instagram, and don't even get me started on the stuff I don't understand yet. So the calendar's in there. We just got off a huge tour in September. We'll be out again this coming weekend for a single show in Indiana, and then I'll be in Portland in early November, back into Pennsylvania again for a show. And then we'll be in a dinner theater in Columbiana, Ohio for, I think, 9 shows, Christmas shows. And then we're coming up to Altona, Manitoba. Maybe
I should come and see you, because that's literally, let me see, that's about an hour and a half for me.
Oh my gosh, you got to come down. We're doing 2 Christmas shows, 23rd and 24th.
Of December? Or?
Yeah. We're gonna spend Christmas in Altona, Manitoba. What do you think?
Of all places. Wow, I am definitely coming to see you.
Sweet. And we're looking to do an extended tour up into Manitoba next year.
Good.
Either the spring or the fall. So.
Hey everyone, this is Paul Walker. If you like what you just heard, be sure to check out more of what we have to offer at MennoNerds.com. It's the hub for all things MennoNerds. From there, you can learn more about these podcasts, syndicated blogs from people all over the world, books authored by some of our members, and a host of other exciting free resources for you and your church. Now, there's one last thing. What we do costs a bit of money, And we're always doing it on a volunteer basis. We have people that are committed to making this happen, but we could use more people. If you like what we do, please consider donating monthly. We have two options. You can either do a monthly donation through Patreon, or you can give a one-time donation at any time through PayPal. We love the work we do, but we do need your help to keep it going and to expand into new territory. If you would like to donate, check out MennoNerds.com/donate. Thanks for listening, and as always, have a great day.